Good evening, everybody. So, this is the start of Group 4's culture project that we are doing. Group 4 decided to do the culture of the Japanese. So, let's get started. The land of the rising sun is the home of one of the oldest, deepest, richest history and some of the most beautiful landscapes you could ever imagine. A place where people are always friendly and technology industries are booming. A land of complex human interactions as well as strong sense of communal duty and respect. As we have learned throughout this class, culture is complex and it has many components that are involved in order to understand it. Today we'll be discussing several of those components that we covered in our textbook throughout this quarter and applied it to the Japanese culture to help us understand it a little better. So let's dive into the first two chapters. Chapter 2 being Why Don't We All See Things the Same Way? And Chapter 3 Intercultural and International Communications. Why don't we all see things the same way? Comes from the idea that we live through different lenses that are dependent of a number of variables that will make us perceive things differently and experience a culture differently, whether that be our upbringing or societal normalities. As we apply these to the Japanese culture, we see that there are differences between the US culture and the Japanese culture. Individual differences, although many in Japan consider themselves a huge part of a larger group, each have their own little differences that set them apart from one another. Styles of clothing, genre of music, social status, cars they drive, but in the end of it all, they all come together usually for a greater good of their society, especially now during the COVID pandemic. They all have to come together as a nation to slow down its spread without shutting down the economy due to its geographical location. It has made things a bit easier to control. Being secluded geographically has enabled Japan to create their own culture, language, and way of life. Martial art are things they've taken very seriously and discipline just as serious. Even today, you can still see some of the Bushido teachings live throughout the Japanese culture. Courage, to do what is right at all times, politeness. Even when differences in culture, one shows politeness and respect. Honesty, humility, honor, doing what one must at all times without hesitation. Loyalty, a strong fidelity to a nation or boss, always placing those things ahead of oneself. Self-control, no matter what the situation, always doing what is right, are just some of the Bushido codes still living today after the many years of Japanese culture being established. Bowing down to someone shows their respect and willing to engage in a conversation, unlike the United States, where we are still fiddling around with our cell phones or half paying attention. They will be engaged with no disruptions, which will be considered extremely lewd if so. Japanese are extremely precise with their time management. If they say they will be there at, for example, 0555, they will be there at that very moment. Any deviation prior or before will not be accepted. If you're the one who is late, they will be very, very offended by that. In Chapter 3, we cover intercultural and international communications and its understanding differences and how those differences can affect how we perceive our cultures and other cultures perceive us. The Japanese, when it comes to stereotypes, this can be taken both ways. Japanese stereotypes are the ones that everybody thinks that they are all the same when it comes to regards if you're from Japan. You know karate, you're a math genius, you're some type of technology guru. On the other hand, the Japanese do stereotype others from other countries as well. There are many establishments within Japan that if you aren't a Japanese national, you will not be allowed to go in and or they will refuse you service, usually by a sign, and it's something like an X, and they'll just like tell you to kind of go about your way. There are many Japanese nationals that will be confused or mistaken by any other Oriental culture or vice versa. That would be the case for assumed similarity. Rites of initiation, the Japanese have quite a lengthy list of rites, each of them to be a specific stage of one's life and how their transition from uh, one stage of life to another. You have a birthright, you have boys or girls day, first birthday, coming to age, which is about around the age of 20, when a man or an adult reaches adulthood. There's a marriage rite, there's an elder rite, and an ancestorship rite and celebrations. Within the celebrations, Japanese have their own unique language, writing, the kanji. They're also famous for the mangas, which is basically the Japanese comics. They have Buddha statues all around the country. They have two main religions, the Shinto and the Buddhism. Rituals for every stage of one's life is since they are born, and all which are part of their collective type of culture. In which are ways a culture interacts with one another and how they interact with another culture. That is why it is important for us to understand how cultures and their cultures' histories and how they are interacted in the past so we aren't making the same mistakes as the past.
The first topic that I wanted to talk about was words and sayings may have different meanings depending what culture you are presenting to. Um, no matter what culture you're presenting to in conversation, words can have different meanings, and so does the way we engage each other. In Japan, it is very common for people to greet with a small bow. In America, if someone was to come up to you and bow to you, you would obviously find it to be odd or strange. Um, in America, we are very vocal and we start a conversation by either a handshake or by saying hello to one another. Um, Number two, interpersonal communication when you are giving self talk or imaginary thoughts are running through your head. The interpersonal communication that comes through in the Japanese culture is quite similar to the way Americans use interpersonal communication. The inner thoughts that go through our heads in certain times of crisis or even joy all interlock with each other. Depending what you're going through at a certain time, there's always a voice inside your head that is saying either yes, go for it, or no, you have to be hesitant and hold back a little bit. For three, communication through two or more cultures, finding common ground in conversation. When you travel to Japan as an American, you are immediately thrown into the way that Japanese communicate. They're very to the point, and they don't waste their time in conversations. Verbal communication along with nonverbal communication are used often since our two cultures don't speak the same language, obviously. We can use hand signals and also use landmarks when needing to find something or to make a point in a conversation. Number four, anime helps teach the Japanese culture and shows how conflicts can arise and how it can be solved. Anime is a huge part of the Japanese culture, and they teach life lessons for the youth as well as everyday life. They are fictional stories that all have a plot, and they can teach the Japanese cultures and the way their history has changed over the years. A lot of the youth of Japan will really be into anime as it's like the Americans' superhero, you could say. Like Spider-Man and Batman and whatnot. They look up to their characters, which is an important trait to have when you're young, is to always have a role model, which anime characters are exactly that for them. Number five, conversation is to the point and concise compared to the way Americans tend to talk and communicate. In the Japanese culture, the conversations that happen are very precise and to the point. In America, we talk about a bunch of extra topics within one conversation, and those don't really have much substance. The way of communicating is very appealing to me, and I personally feel that it makes a point better as well. I think Americans have a very, I guess, very loose way of communicating, and sometimes you can be caught in a conversation with someone and they ramble off a bunch of random stuff that doesn't really matter. But in Japan, it seems that the conversations are very short, and whatever topic they want to get across to someone, they will get across to it very quickly and in a timely manner. Number 6, language has rules such as syntactic, semantic, and contextual. The Japanese language is very complex and has lots of words that may have different meanings in our culture in America. This is seen in daily communication between both cultures. When we compare two languages like Japanese and English language, you can see both comparisons and also differences that are apparent through conversations. Number 7, language barrier is apparent when traveling to a new country and experiencing new cultures. When traveling to Japan, you will find an immediate language barrier. With a combination of two cultures, you are able to find a common ground when having a conversation. You can find general areas where you will find pamphlets or maps in the area that you are in currently. With nonverbal communication, we are able to use hand signals to communicate, and also using pictures is a helpful way of communicating with a different language. Number 8, and the last point that I made, is painting a picture in someone's head is a common way to help verbal communication across humans. Nonverbal communication across cultures is very common since we don't speak the same language, and to be able to communicate, we can use landmarks to describe what we are looking for, or we can use small snippets of language that are used that we can use wherever we are at in the world. Before you travel, you should always study the culture's language that you're going to be going into. Therefore, that gives you a solid bank of words that can be used in conversation. The more you study before you leave, the more you can communicate easier with someone, and that helps both parties out because you're not struggling to find your way about a certain place or something, or like if you're like looking for a certain restaurant, you can take general words from the Japanese language and be able to study them before you enter that culture.
Culture shock happens for many reasons because we're in an unknown place and we're expecting it to be similar to our country, and we don't know what to do. Something we should learn is nonverbal expressions because it's not universal. The definition on 6.2 of regulators is a nonverbal expression that controls, encourages, or discourages interactions. So in the Japanese culture, body language, they don't gesture very much. Their body language is restricted. They hold their hands together when they speak to prevent them from gesturing through conversations. Eye contact with strangers is considered rude. Facial expressions is common for Japanese people to smile in interactions regardless of topic. This evidently differs between personalities, but modest, reserved demeanor is polite. Nodding, Japanese people often nod to acknowledge what is said, but they always don't agree. It's just out of politeness. Feet, showing the soles of your feet is considered rude. Inhaling is a way the Japanese disagree, and they typically inhale through their teeth. Silence is very important. Pausing and getting a response indicates that someone has applied appropriate thought and consideration to their question. And I think that's similar to section 6.3. A pregnant pause is a silence between verbal messages that is full of meaning. A silent that's it. Pointing is done using the entire hand, unless referring to oneself, in which case they place the index finger on their nose. Waving, shaking the hands with the palms facing towards the side is to side means no. Gesturing, a Japanese person may claps their hands together in front of their chest when apologizing or accepting something. Bowing is a sign of salutation, reverence, apology, or gratitude in social or religious situations. So another thing we should learn is pop culture in Japan because it's very popular over there. And the definition of pop culture is a collection of widely accepted messages, knowledge, and practice that is represented through popular values, attitudes, and beliefs, which is on section 7.2. So pop culture in Japan consists of many things in Japan, like four-legged and feathered animals and cafes. It's popular in Japan right now because they let you play with animals. Although cat cafes are the most popular, they have many other animals like hedgehogs, owls, rabbits, and reptiles. According to the website, there are at least 100 cafes in Japan alone. It's an opportunity for people who can't have pets in their apartments due to regulations or other complications go somewhere to pet an animal. Some people may go to the cafe to see which pet fits them best before purchasing an animal, and they let you feed and play with them. On section 7.2, mass culture is the message that creates received through mass media. From print to electronic media refers to the messages created and received through mass media. From print to electronic mass culture is an aspect of pop culture and it impacts it's regulated to the size of its audience, often massive or even global, and its influence on other cultures. So vehicles with fancy characters is another trend in Japan. Their uh, characters and logos from anime, manga, and games on cars. Otaku originated from Greek culture. They use heroines and beautiful young female characters from anime games. They customize their cars and call them Ishita, and it's a slang expression. Ita from the term itel mean ouch or painful, used for something disgraceful that you cannot bear to look at. In a joking combination with the term ita isha, which is abbreviated for Italian made cars characterized by innovative design. So high culture is artifacts, customs, traditions, and creations associated with education and often exclusively consist of artifacts, customs, oh, I just said that again, sorry, which is on section 7.3. And I think they have many festivals, and festivals are called Matsuru, have been held all across Japan since ancient times, and they are very important events for people living nearby. And these traditions of these festivals have been passed down through generations to present day. They have conducted with a focus on tradition and honor the customs and rules with incorporating the history and practice of each religion. About 60 years ago, a different type of festival came to be with Japan Kochi Prefecture, in contrast with Matsuri, that placed great emphasis on tradition. Yosoki Mastery. This festival lets all kinds of people from all ages go wild with excitement, and they celebrate in a freer and merrier manner. The word Yoski comes from Yoski Bashi, the name of the folk song dating back many years in Kochi preferences. Yoshi is an old Japanese word meaning come and visit night. It has spread from its originated birthplace to many areas across Japan and even multiple countries around the world. So the last trend I'm going to be talking about is crooked fang teeth called yebi. Japanese men find it attractive and think it makes women look younger. Blogs are devoted to yebi, and celebrities proudly display it, and many women are paying the dentist to make their teeth look like that by asphyxiating plastic fronts in their real teeth.
In Chapter 8, we investigate how social media is a marketplace where we invest time, resources, in representing ourselves and interacting with others. So let's begin with how Japan and social media are used. First, how is social media used in Japan? Virtual communication can be defined as representational interaction between individuals, groups, and communities within the online environment. 8.2. One of the biggest social media platforms that is being used in Japan today is Line. Line is a messaging app created in the wake of the 2011 Japanese tsunami. It was developed as a means to communicate after the disaster because many other channels of communication were broken down. It soon became extremely popular and gained traction in other parts of Asia like Indonesia and Thailand. In a BBC News article, The Japanese Men Who Prefer Virtual Girlfriends to Sex by Anita Arani, she interviews two men who affiliate with being otaku, men who love anime, manga, and computers so much they believe to be in a relationship with a virtual girlfriend. A Nintendo app is what they use to interact with their virtual girlfriends, called Love Plus. A survey by the Ministry of Health, Labor and Welfare in 2010 found 36% of Japanese males aged 16 to 19 had no interest in sex, a figure that has doubled in the space of 2 years. The reason this is important to know about the Japanese culture is that they face a declining birth rate crisis where its population will shrink by a third between now and 2060. Dobson's commodity dream girl icon and Japanese anime. Now that we discussed the birth rate crisis and one of the reasons affiliated with it, let's talk Japanese anime. In 8.4, Dobson's comedy dream girls icon is defined as a drawn, animated, digitally rendered erotic images of female. This can be associated with Japanese anime today because most of the anime characters who are female are shown to be sex figures with visible, exposing, and protruding female body parts and exposing clothing. As someone who has watched anime before, I know that most of the female main characters all have similar body figures, like big breasts and exposing clothing. Another thing noted in anime is how male characters show hegemonic masculinity, 8.4, or a public display of male dominance. Usually in anime cases, the male character has to save or guide the female character, and the female characters usually always fall in love with them in a harem-style fashion. This demonstrates male dominance. What do Japanese do with libel and slander comments online? Do they have the same punishments as the US? Defamation is the act of saying something untrue about someone else in order to harm their reputation. It can be divided into two subcategories, slander and libel. Slander is defamation that's spoken and libel is defamation that's printed. 8.2. Japan, like the US, has laws to prevent the use of libel and slander defamation. But the difference is that the US, once you die, those rights are gone and people can say slander and write libel things about you with no punishment. Unlike Japan, these laws still apply after death, meaning that even if you are a corpse, people can't say anything to damage your reputation without consequences. In Chapter 9, we learn the expectations of healthcare and health, laws and their law enforcement, travel and tourism, and education are all contained and expressed in their own culture. So what Japanese health looks like in terms of healthcare? Japan's health disparity, 9.2, which is the difference between who has access to healthcare and who does not. Japan is known for having one of the best healthcare systems around the world. It's cheap, affordable, and because the government sets their prices for medicine and procedures at a singular amount that is affordable for all. The best part is the access you have to see doctors. You don't even need an appointment to meet with one. Children under 15 get to be seen for free. The one downside is that because it's so available, doctors don't have enough time for each patient. So for patients who have emergencies, they may not have the time that they need to see the doctor. How tourism has impacted Japan and Japanese citizens. Tourism is getting bigger and bigger by the year. In the land of the rising sun, many come to visit unique landscape and culture. From anime to Tokyo, this is the historical roots of Japan. According to Martin and Nakayama in 9.3, they list a few things to consider when visiting a new culture. 1. Gathering information. 2. Learning the language. 3. Learning the customs. 4. Being considerate. 5. Being flexible. 6. Being patient. 7. Being reflective. And 8. Being listening and observing. These are important to consider because as of late, Japan has faced some problems with tourists. Citizens claim they have been rude because they are ignorant of the Japanese customs. One being is that it is rude to eat and walk at the same time. You may not know that, but if you did your research and know the customs there and how what's appropriate and what's not, you would find out. Some tourists have even vandalized historic property by writing their names in the stone. Remember, not knowing is not a good excuse when visiting another culture. What does education look like, and how does it compare to the Western culture? Uh, Sorry if I butcher this. Erasmus once said, "The main hope of a nation lies in the proper education of its youth." 9.5. Japan and the US education are both similar and very different. While Americans are busy constructing common standards and benchmarks, developing the use of standardized tests for all students, and moving towards standards-based school reform, the Japanese seem to desire just the opposite: deconstructing uniform standards, moving away from the pressures of national exams, and focusing more on the interests of the potential of each student, a goal that has often been ignored in Japanese culture and school, but is now being more affiliated with it. This also means that the many Japanese students have a very high quality basic education. Another thing that you might find interesting is that compared to the US, where we start in August and end in June, um, Japanese education, they start in March, or start in April and end in March, and have way fewer less days. In conclusion, Japan is a very fascinating culture full of interpersonal and international interactions that are both similar and different from our own. We can learn through these interactions to better understand the culture and the people who reside there. Obviously, it's important to learn about these distinctive cultural differences if you ever want to visit Japan, because they may help you on your journey. Different cultures have different ways of thinking, interacting, speaking, and living than your own. So you better take some notes. If you ever do visit Japan, I hope this presentation will guide you along your journey. Thank you.